this one and workshops in this FOT-Net Data project. Last week, we did the first webinar, which is concerned with contacts, functions, research questions, and hypotheses presented by my colleague Oliver Custom. Today, Dr. Yvonne Barnett will be talking about performance indicators, study design, and measures and sensors in the FOT methodology. Yvonne is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Transport Studies, University of Leeds, with extensive research experience in the driving behavior, new technologies in cars, and the design and the deployment of field operational tests. Graduated in psychology, Yvonne is equipped with a specialized expertise in artificial intelligence, which I've never figured out what it is. Yvonne has been seconded to Article for about 2 years to coordinate and manage FOT-related projects, including FOT-Net 2, and to make the substantial contributions to this current FOT-Net data support action. So today is, from my point of view, today is a good time to ask her your questions regarding FOT, all the aspects of FOTs. Before her presentation, I thought that it might be helpful if I give you a quick run-through of the basic information of this project, such as the objectives, the consortium, and the main activities. More importantly, I hope that it could give you some information about how and when you may want to be involved in this project and what you may expect from this project. So you can see on the screen, the FOT-Net data is a continuation of FOT-Net activities with a special focus on data sharing and reuse support. The main objective of this 3-year support action project are to support sharing and reuse of FOT datasets created in previous projects, develop a systematic framework for sharing and reusing collected data, build a detailed catalog of available data and tools needed for example, accessing the database systems and processing the required datasets. Continue to be an international network for informing FOT activities, sharing the lessons learned, and promoting cross-border collaboration. To achieve this, the project is structured in 6 work packages as shown in this table, and the typical activities include enhancement of FOT network platform, creation of a data sharing framework, specification of data and tools, and promotion of the FOT methodology. The webinars, including this one, are tasked in work package 5. On the lower right side, you can see some information about the duration of the project, its budget and project partners, and also associated partners. Work package 5 aims to enhance and update the FOT methodology with new information about data sharing and reuse, transfer knowledge of the methodology, and provide hands-on experiences of data usage, by which we mean that some data sets will be provided at the workshop, and people can have a look and assess how easy or how difficult previous data can be used for their research questions. On these slides, you will see an overall overview of the 6 webinars we're going to organize. We did one last week. each of which targets a specific part of the FOT methodology. These webinars are especially designed for participants who are relatively new to FOTs or who wanted to become familiar with FOT methodology, but I'm sure that experienced users will also benefit from participating in these activities, as we know that many new thoughts and ideas always come up when we address the very first fundamental issues and principles. As I said earlier, today Yvonne will present the second topic. The same time next Wednesday, the 26th, Helena Gellerman at SAFER will be talking about a very interesting and important topic, which is concerned with ethical and legal issues. I'm sure that you are aware of how difficult these issues can be addressed in reality. So we hope that Helena will give us some hints and tricks in tackling that. In the near future, more webinars will be organized. You are warmly welcome to join us. The materials and the presentations from webinars will be used to create e-learning modules, which will be uploaded to the project website and made available for self-study. Finally, you can find more information and cooperation opportunities from the project website, or email us with your specific questions if you like. Thank you very much again for your participation today, and I hope you can attend other webinars in the future. So now I pass the floor to Yvonne.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Yvonne Barnard, and today we will talk about the FESTA methodology and the FESTA handbook on the topic of performance indicators, study designs, measures and sensors. So a lot of topics. Let's start immediately. Everything that's being discussed in these webinars is coming from the FESTA handbook, the handbook for the methodology of conducting and preparing field operational tests, as well as naturalistic driving studies. The handbook can be downloaded from the FOT-Net website, and the last revision was at the end of February 2014, so not so long ago. The most important part of the FESTA handbook and the methodology is one picture, the so-called FESTA V. The FESTA V gives all the steps that are necessary to prepare a field operational test, so determine what kind of systems you want to investigate, defining use cases when the systems or functions should do something, to define the research questions and make hypotheses. What is it that you want to know? And then we come to performance indicators, methods, study design, measures and sensors, what we're going to talk about today. Then we have a phase where there is the data acquisition itself. And when all the data are in, they need to be stored, they need to be analyzed. The answers have to be given to the research questions, the hypothesis tested. And finally, we have to determine what the impact is of full-scale use of such a system that was tested in the field operational test. It's a V, so all these phases are related to each other. And above you see the context. That's important because field operational tests are not being performed in isolation. And on the very left side you see the implementation plan, and I'll come back to that. Today we're going to talk about the lower left side of this FESTA V. And this is where things become very practical. Those of you who attended last week, they remember that Oliver Carsten talked about research questions and use cases. That is the more higher level. You have to define what you want to know from your test. But now we're going into more detail, all the things you have to define and to arrange in order that you get your vehicles out on the road and collect data. So today we're going to talk about performance indicators, the definition and the measures that are needed for to evaluate those performance indicators. We look a bit at events, and especially the crash relevant events. I tell you about the matrix that has been made in FESTA, and we look at the impact areas. Next we go to the topic of experimental procedures. We look at the participants of a field operational test, study design, the environment, and we look into the need to conduct pilot studies, and a special topic is that of controlled testing versus naturalistic driving. The third topic is sensors. How do you acquire your data? Data acquisition systems. We look at some specific sensors and at the data acquisition system. And I have some final remarks under the title, It's Not That Easy. This is the slide, the last slide of Oliver Carsten that was used in his presentations last week, performance indicators, which is the task you have to do after you have established and prioritized hypothesis. So this task is to define the performance indicators, measurements to be taken to test those hypotheses. And performance indicators can be objective, messages that are transmitted, speed of the vehicle, the lateral position, etc., etc. It can also be subjective, so asked from the participants about the acceptance of the system, the workload, the willingness to pay, and many other things. So before we look into more detail in these performance indicators, we first go to the official definition as is given by the FESTA handbook. It's a long definition, so let's have a look at the different elements. Performance indicators are quantitative or qualitative indicators. So they can have a number like speed, so many kilometers per hour, or they can be qualitative. I trust this system very much. And they are derived from one or several measures. So you have to measure something, either quantitatively or qualitatively, in order to determine the performance indicator. And they are agreed on beforehand. So in the methodology, you determine your performance indicator and your measures when you set up the whole studies. So it's not about trying to find something in data you have collected, but you make these definitions, you make these, you determine these measures beforehand. Performance indicators are expressed as a percentage, an index, a rate, or some other value. So that means that performance indicators are usually a comparison, because often your hypotheses are also defined in a more quantitative way. So you see what, for example, what percentage of the time the vehicle of your participants are in congestion, or whether they accept or like the system more than other systems, whether when people drive with a system they drive faster than without a system, or in comparison with another group. So they are expressed as a percentage, an index, rate, or some value. And these measures that are used are monitored at regular or irregular intervals and can be compared to one or more criteria. So you can have a field operational test where you collect data all the time, or you can have a field operational test where you collect some data at certain points. For example, if you have a questionnaire, you only take that measure, you collect your data only at certain points in time. If you're measuring speed from the car, you would do it all the time the vehicle is driving. I already talked about the comparison with one or more criteria. And the most used criterion is, of course, the values you will find in your baseline. So when participants are driving without a system. So examples of performance indicators are the mean speed over a certain period of time, or over your whole field operational test, or your mean speed at a certain type of road. Could also, another example is the percentage that the driver is not looking at the road, but looking at something else. Again, you have to find some criteria. Is it percentage eyes of the road while the system is on, or while he or she is driving in a particular environment? So these kinds of definitions have to be made in order to be able to test your hypothesis. So let's go from the definition of performance indicators to measures. The things you can measure in your field operational test. And often a performance indicator will need several measures in order to be established. We can distinguish different types of measures. You have the direct measures. You can also call them raw data. For example, the distance to a lead vehicle that you can, for example, measure with a radar. You measure it directly, you don't do anything with those data, and you use them to later in your analysis. But you can also have indirect measures. So you have to reprocess or process the data in order to get something meaningful out of it. For example, if you look at time to collision, you'll have to calculate the distance to the lead vehicle, but also the speed of your own vehicle or the participant's vehicle, also the speed of the other vehicle. So you have to do something with several types of data in order to get your indirect measure. Another example is if you look at acceptance or trust of a system, you will look at both questionnaire where you ask participants, do you trust the system, do you accept the system, but you will also look at the percentage of the time the participant has the system turned on. Because if he says, I trust the system, but he always turns it off, you get something different than when he has it on all the time. So these are the things you can measure with the sensors. Then there is something more complex, which we call events. So that's a series of things that are happening over usually a short period of time. For example, an overtaking maneuver. So the car has to speed up, turn the indicator on, steer, go back. So the driver has to do a lot of things, and a lot of things can be measured. And you have to define what is an event for you in your field operational test. For safety-related research, people are, of course, interested in events that might predict some danger, which brings the driver into a dangerous situation. And we'll come back to those type of events. Then there are measures that are really self-reported. It can be a questionnaire, but it can also be an interview or a focus group. So it's the participant, it's him or herself that provides the measure and not some kind of external sensor. It's more subjective. And then finally there are situational variables that have in principle nothing to do with the driver or the system or the vehicle, but more with the environment. For example, people will drive differently when there's heavy rain or mist than when the sun shines, but you have to collect those kind of data, else you won't be able to understand the driver behavior. When we look at safety-related research, we are often interested in how crashes evolve. Luckily, in especially Western European research, we won't find many crashes in field operational tests. On the one hand, that's quite lucky because you don't want your participants to be harmed. On the other hand, if we want to know about how crashes come into being and how they evolve, you like to know more about them. So researchers are often searching for events that are dangerous and that might lead to a crash. And those events, of course, are to be found much more than real crashes. For example, situations where a driver is driving too fast and comes too close to another vehicle. He brakes just in time, and luckily it's not a crash, but it's what we can call a crash-relevant event. It could have been a crash if he was a little bit later with braking. So what you would like to do in your data, you would like to find those kinds of events. But that's not that simple, because not all hard braking is a potentially dangerous situation. In FOT-Net 2 there was a complete working group devoted to this topic, and they tried to look at definitions. And it's not that simple. There are not simple definitions that everyone can use in the field operational test. Some definitions are based on the response of the driver, and that can be an objective response, like decelerating, hard braking, jerking on the steering wheel, but it can also be a startled response. The driver, ah, what's happening? So you can see that, for example, in a video. If you do a field operational test with a safety function, for example, a forward collision warning system, you can also use the response of the system itself. If the system gives warning, the driver is probably in a dangerous situation. Then there is the driving context, because it's not only the driver who does something, but maybe things are happening in the environment, maybe not even noticed by the driver. But if you're, for example, having videos of the external environment, you might be able to identify dangerous situations. And finally, there's the driving history. If the driver is doing something completely different than he or she would normally do, it might be related to some safety critical incident. Usually in field operational tests or in naturalistic driving studies, approaches are combined, looking at several elements. And as I said, it's difficult to give strict definitions or recommendations on what definition to use. There is research where you see that researchers looking at the same types of events with the same definition come up with other numbers of pressure relevant events than other researchers. There is a lot about this topic in the handbook. There's a report of that working group. There is even a PhD thesis on this topic, and you can find the references either on our website or in the handbook. This is a slide you will find difficult to read, so don't worry. It's the matrix of performance indicators, measures and sensors. This matrix is a separate document. It's an Excel sheet. And in this matrix, all kinds of performance indicators are linked to different types of measures, which are again linked to different types of sensors, with all kinds of details and recommendations. Again, there is a link in the handbook, so which will bring you directly to this Excel sheet. And it serves as a support for people who try to identify possible performance indicators and gives them advice on the measures they have to take and the sensors that can be used. Finally, performance indicators can be related to the different impact areas that were discussed earlier by Oliver Carsten. For example, for driving performance and safety, you can look at the driver's glance. Where is the driver looking? At the road or at the system or somewhere in the car? At the speed which he or she is driving. You can also look at the behavior and the performance of the system that is being tested in field operational test and the influence on the behavior of the driver. For example, you can look at false alarms. You can look at the interaction between the system and the driver. Is the driver turning the system off? Is he distracted by the system? If you are interested in environmental aspects, you can look at performance indicators like exhaust emissions and the fuel consumption and see whether your system that you are testing is making a difference. Another impact area is traffic efficiency. So you can look at the mean travel time of drivers or groups of drivers or the mean speed in certain areas. For example, if you're testing a new traffic management service, you can look at those kind of indicators to see whether the system has a positive influence. And finally, things like acceptance and trust, willingness to pay. You can look at perceived usefulness. What does the participant say about the usefulness of the system? But you can also see how often and in what conditions the system is used. So enough about performance indicators, because if we know what we want to measure, the following question is, of course, how are we going to measure it? And that brings us to the next topic, experimental procedures. Chapter 6 in the FESTA handbook. Experimental procedures are defined to ensure experimental rigor and scientific quality, to make sure that you're not just sending out people on the road and try to collect some data, but that you think beforehand how you're all going to organize your study. So the topics to be discussed and the things you have to think about and to define when preparing a study are participants, the study design, the experimental environment, piloting, and controlled testing. Participants, the people that will drive the vehicles that are participating in your field operational test or your naturalistic driving study, are of course very important. Participants, people, have characteristics. They have demographics, gender, age, educational background, many more things, where they live, what country. They have experience in driving or riding if you are doing a motorcycle FOT, but also experience with technology, with systems in their vehicles. And they have personalities, and they have attitudes towards technology, towards driving. And these characteristics may determine what they are doing, how they are driving, what they are doing on the road, how they are interacting with your technology that is to be tested. In an ideal world, you would have a group of participants that is representative for the things you want to investigate. If you're doing a naturalistic driving study, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could find a group that is representative for the whole population of Europe? Well, even if you have a very big field operational test or naturalistic driving study, that's of course not possible. You will never have more than hundreds or even thousands of participants, but the variation in the population is always important. So you have to find a group that's best suited for your study. And it's important because, for example, if you study driving on the highway and you have a large population of very old people, they often don't drive on the highway so often. If you have young people, they probably don't have much experience. So it's important to find out what type of participants you want to have. If you want to know about people that have, for example, personalities that like risk-taking, it might not so be easy to select people on that, because you have to test a lot of people before you can determine whether they're in your study or not. So either you select people on the basis of characteristics, or you just note down the characteristics of your participants, and later on in your statistical analysis you use it as a covariable and to take into account those differences. And how that's to be done, we will see that in the webinar on data analysis. So the big question is, how many participants do we need? That depends on what effects you expect. If you expect a large effect, you don't need so many people. And if you are only dealing with small effects, you need much more people. If you have a system that will limit speeds, you might see a big effect if people normally on a certain type of road drive much faster, and you have a speed limiter, they just cannot drive faster, so the effect may be quite big. You don't need thousands of people to prove that effect. If we're talking, for example, about fuel consumption. The effect might be quite small, but interesting over a large population. So you need more people to find that effect. It also depends, of course, on how often something happens. If your system is dealing with events, you have to make sure that those events happen regularly, else you have to drive for a much longer time. It's a bit more complicated than just that rule, small effects, large sample, and large effects, small sample. Because if you have many participants, you can still find some significant small effects. But you have to ask yourselves, are those effects relevant? If you have many people and you have a system that helps to reduce the speed, you might find a statistically significant effect. But if it means that people only drive a few kilometers slower, you can ask yourself, well, is that what I was looking for? Will that really improve safety? Of course, more participants and longer tests is expensive, so you need the resources for that. It might be difficult to recruit a very specific driver group. So you, in order to get the right people for your hypothesis testing, that might make it difficult to recruit those people. And again, some events do not occur very often, so you have to think about that. There are ways to determine how big your sample size must be. Power analysis, I won't go into detail. Ideas and definitions are given in the FESTA handbook. Have a look at that. There are some rule of thumb how many participants are needed. Then the study design has to be developed in order to be able to test those hypotheses. And just to remind you, an hypothesis is a specific statement which can be tested with statistical means. And in order to be able to test hypotheses, you have to have a clear study design, also called experimental design. And your design can be within subjects. So first you let your participants drive without a system in the baseline, and then you let him or her drive with a system in experimental conditions, and you see what the difference is between those, between the baseline and the experimental situation. It can also be between subjects. So one group drives with one system, the other group drives with another system, and you look at the differences between those groups. You can have a longitudinal design where you let people drive for quite a long time with a system, and you look at how the behavior evolves over time. We have the baseline, already discussed in the last webinar, where people in principle drive without the system under investigation, so you can compare. Sometimes you have to let people drive for quite a long time in the baseline condition in order to get a good picture, and in order for them to drive normally as they would when they were not in the study. There are some threats to the validity of your design, and there are interfering effects. For example, you can have unplanned events. If the government suddenly changes the speed limit on a certain type of road, or in a certain area there's much more police on the streets to to look at violations, you have a different situation. So you cannot compare your baseline with the experimental period because things have changed and you don't have a good comparison anymore. There's also the effect of maturation of experience. People get experience with the system and over time and may use it in a different way, or they might change their ideas. For example, in the FOT-Net project, where they were looking at nomadic devices, people in the beginning were very enthusiastic about certain systems, and then when they drove with it, they became much less pleased with the system. But after a while, their appreciation of the system went up again. So if your FOT is too short, you just measure that period when they're not so content with it, because it didn't match their high expectations. But if you look longer, you see that they become more realistic and then they start to appreciate the system more. So that's, those effects are important. Then of course the selection of your participants can bring a bias that you did not anticipate, and you always have to be aware of that. And then of course people can drop out, and it might be the case that the people that drop out are the people who don't like your system. So there you can again get a bias and a threat to the validity of your study. It's also important to look at the environment, because people can drive in different locations, different countries. If it's a European study, they can drive on different types of roads. There's a large range of roads, and unfortunately there is not a standardized way of describing roads. Traffic conditions might be different. The interaction with other road users is maybe very important. Whether there's a lot of congestion or not, for example. Weather, of course, plays a role. And the time of day and the season. For example, if your baseline is in the summer and your experimental period in the winter, you might get different effects. So you have to control for that. Also, on different times of the day, different types of drivers might be active. If you have someone who has to bring children to school, the driver will often drive at certain times of the day. When you have defined everything, what you're going to do, you have to pilot. And the first line is pilot, pilot, and again pilot, because the experience from all field operational tests shows that piloting, trying it out, is really crucial, because a lot of things can go wrong. So you have to look at the technical function of the data collection in real driving conditions. You have to look at the usability and how the systems are used and identify the main critical issues with real drivers, which might behave differently or have different opinions on the usability than your test drivers or researchers. And you need to pilot the whole overall evaluation process, data collection, but also the analysis to see whether it's really feasible. Then there are two ways to do things. You can have naturalistic driving, where you look at normal driving. The driver drives as he or she always does. He or she determines where to go, when to drive. But that does not always help you to answer your questions. For example, with cooperative systems, when there is communication with the infrastructure or car-to-car communication, if only a few cars are instrumented, the chances that one instrumented car will meet another instrumented car is small. And if you have only some intersections instrumented, people have to drive there in order to test out the system. So in those cases, it's better to determine some test scenarios that drivers have to follow and to do some controlled testing instead of just letting drivers do whatever they like. And the FESTA handbook gives recommendations for this way of performing your field operational test. Okay. We know what we want to know. We know how to measure it. So the next step is to define the instruments, the sensors, which are going to be used to get the data in, to collect the data. Data acquisition, in a sense, is the primary goal of the whole preparation phase of your field operational test or naturalistic driving study. Again, the data can be objective, like the speed, can be subjective, the attitude. You can also acquire and collect metadata, for example about the weather, but also about the economic situation. Some field operational tests in Europe were performed during the start of the recession, and then there were less cars on the road. So it's important to know about these kind of things and to note them down somewhere. Metadata can also be something very simple, the type of car people are driving, what other systems are there in the car. So everything that you think that might be relevant later on for the analysis or the determination of the impact have to be noted down. We can distinguish several types of sensors. The in-vehicle data acquisition system, so all the data that can be collected from the vehicle itself. Systems that are brought in by the driver, nomadic devices, like a navigation system or a smartphone. You have the questionnaires and the subjective data acquisition methods, interviews, focus groups, travel diaries. And you have cooperative systems and infrastructure that also can collect data. What kind of messages are exchanged between the driver and the infrastructure or between cars. That brings us to some specific sensors. There is, for example, the video. You can video inside the car, looking at what the driver is doing, his or her face, the feet, how does he or she use the pedals, but also outside. What's happening around the vehicle, the blind spots of a car. You can have a smart camera, where the camera itself has some intelligence and can detect, for example, pedestrians, identify pedestrians, so you can use those kind of data. Data can come from the vehicle bus, from the CAN bus. So you tap directly into the data that are gathered by the car, so in the speed, the acceleration, all kinds of other variables. But to access that vehicle bus, you really need the cooperation of the vehicle manufacturer, because they have to give permission. Some data are confidential and are not allowed to be seen by others. Then there are things like head trackers and eye trackers to see where the driver is looking or whether he's nodding off. Also not always easy. And eye tracking in a car is sometimes very difficult. You have radar, GPS, you can use audio, either to hear whether there are passengers in the car that are talking, or drivers themselves can give a message if they see something they want to comment on. Data can come from the functions that are being tested, like the forward collision warning. That gives you information when a car is too close. You can have external sensors like map matching that gives you information about the roads that are being used by your drivers. There are very different types of sensors. There's a lot to be said about it. Don't worry, I won't do that today. You can find more information in that matrix in the FESTA handbook. And we also have on our website information about all types of sensors that are being used in field operational tests. I'm nearly there. The last slide on this one, on the sensors, is about the data acquisition system. You can define it, you can buy it, you can develop it, but there is a lot that has to be tested. You have to make sure that it can be installed in the vehicles of the participants properly. So the requirements on the electrical and mechanical side that has to be solved. For example, in the U-Drive naturalistic driving study, originally 8 cameras were planned, and one of the cameras was sitting at the passenger side on the dashboard, but it was not possible to have that camera because it could interfere with the airbag. So too dangerous. So interference can happen, also electrical interference with other equipment. There are laws and regulations. You cannot just video with a high resolution everything you like. You have to see whether your data protection authority gives permission, and Helena Gellerman next week will talk about that. You might need a homologation by the manufacturer to make sure that your equipment is not influencing the warranty of the car and is not influencing the normal functioning of all the systems in the car. Such a DAS usually has to be configured, and maybe several times. You can have some online monitoring tool that can look into the status of your equipment online. And then you have to prepare the procedures for installing such a system and also for dismounting the system, and hopefully without, if the car of the participant, him or herself, without having too much damage. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and this slide has the title, "It's not always that easy. Iteration is needed." The FESTA V looks as if you just go down and then go up. But you can define nice performance indicators, nice study design, have measures, define your sensors, and then find out that it's too expensive, that you too technically complex, that you cannot do it, or practicalities, lack of resources. There might be ethical and legal objections. For example, the videoing of the outside world. So you have to go back, maybe find another sensor or find another measurement, but it's also possible that you have to go back to your hypothesis and your research questions, because you, with the means that you have, you just cannot answer your hypothesis. Also from the data analysis side, it might turn out that what you thought in the beginning is not possible, and have to redo it. If, for example, your video has too low resolution, the data analysis people will not be able to find meaningful information out of it, and then you have to rethink things. So iteration is an important part of the whole FOT methodology. And the handbook also gives some guidelines on that. It's complicated, but luckily there's help. There's that matrix. There's also the FOTIP, the FOT implementation plan, which is a document, an annex of the FESTA handbook, with loads and loads of details about tasks and subtasks you have to do, about procedures, advice, do's and don'ts, checklists, all the things you have to take care of. And that provides great help to the practicalities. And of course, there's the experience and there's people. On the website and on the wiki, you can find the experiences from previous seminars, from other projects, and there's an email address. So you can always, if you have a question, ask someone and we will find the right expert. So that ends my presentation. Let me give back the presentation to Heibo or to Maria? To Maria?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We go back to Maria de Rijken. No, we go back to Heibo.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't have anything to show, but we just see whether there's any questions from the participants. Otherwise, can I ask a question first?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Yvonne, you mentioned the experimental procedures in FOT. There's quite a lot of elements there, like participant, study design, and so on and so on. Of course, all these elements take time and resources to be carried out. Hypothetically, if I have a project with a limited budget, does any advice on which of these elements should I focus first, or should I start first? And what kind of drawbacks I might face if with a limited commitment in these areas? Can you just give me some comments on this one, hypothetically?
Yeah. One of the problems, of course, with this methodology and with the handbook is that we try to cater for all situations. And a lot of experience come from the big field operational test. Of course, you can have a very small field operational test with much less resources, and lots of the things don't have to be so complicated because you cannot take into account everything. The most important part is to be sure what you want to know. If you have limited resources, limit your research questions and limit your hypothesis. And go for those things that are easy to measure and easy to acquire, so you don't run into all kinds of technical problems. And there are often cheap solutions. The use of smartphones and apps on smartphones often provides cheap and easy ways to measure things. It might not be so rigorous and so detailed as if you really go for a data acquisition system that accesses a canvas, but still can provide you with information that is useful. So prioritizing always means that you have to have a very good look on what you really want to know and what you really want to test. So there, your priorities come from that.
I see.
Are there other questions?
Actually, I have another one. I don't know whether I should carry on. Should I carry on? Yeah. The methodology has been implemented in a number of projects, such as the CIP project. I was wondering whether there's any comments on the implementation of the methodology in different types of FOT activities. Is the FOT implementation plan too general or too specific to be applicable to different specific FOT activities? Have we heard anything back from this project in which the methodology has been implemented?
We regularly hear back from projects. Most projects, and especially more specialized projects, so not just the very big FOTs, they usually follow the FESTA methodology, but smaller projects or the specialized projects, they follow part of the methodology. Mm-hmm. So they take what is useful for them. They usually follow a systematic approach, because I think that's the most important thing. You have to understand that field operational tests are being performed to get evidence. The European Commission, but also funders, manufacturers, they want evidence about whether the system works or doesn't work, or they want evidence whether safety is increased or it has an effect on the mobility.
Yeah.
In order to get evidence, you have to be quite strict and rigorous, and that's why there's a methodology. If it's not a Bible, it's not the Holy Grail. You can use some things that are useful for you and forget about others. The projects we know of usually take some part of it and look for recommendations in the handbook. If you go to our website, in the library, you will find previous seminars, previous stakeholder meetings, previous international workshops. And there you find all the experiences that people report back from those projects. And we try to collect and store those experiences and make them available for everyone else, so we can learn from each other.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think we are coming to an end.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of questions people want to ask, but well, perhaps we leave it to, we will have opportunities in the future to discuss the FOT methodology. So let's close up this webinar, and thank you very much, Yvonne, for your presentation.
Well, thank you all for your attendance.
Yeah, okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.